Boats come in very many shapes and sizes, and then we'll show you methods to create those various shapes you're seeing. I'm going to start by painting and identifying very simple symmetrical boats. In order to draw anything, you need to understand it. And the first thing you need to understand about boats is the hulls of boats are always symmetrical, otherwise they wouldn't sail. So the first thing to do is look at this, there's just a line down the middle and the boat is actually symmetrical round it. I need my glasses for this. So again, add a little bit more extra to it and it will become a cruiser. A little bit of a cabin, but again, it's all symmetrical. We have to understand, we have to look, we have to observe, we have to see. And once you can see, then how you put your lines in here is the first key to understanding about painting anything, and of course boats particularly. There are notable exceptions where boats are not totally symmetrical, i.e. aircraft carriers, where on one side you've got the superstructure, the other side you've got the flight deck. But I guess when they're made, the weights of the one counterbalance the other. But on most boats you'll find that one side's exactly the same as the other. With a mast, it's the same idea. A boat sitting in water, and the mast will come literally straight out of the middle of it. If it's got a little superstructure on the top, you'll see that just the same. It's very much like one of these sort of Broads sailing boats. Often a canvas kind of tent that goes up at the back there that people sleep in. But very broad and very flat, not seagoing. And that's your simplest form of boat. So we've seen how to create boats symmetrically from the front. Occasionally you'll see boats and there'll be angles to you, and a boat normally has a sweep to it. And it's creating that sweep that's the difficulty that most people find. But it's quite simply done. Usually it's like a figure of 8, a little loop like that. And if you put a wine glass at the back, that becomes the stern. The front just drops down here like so, and of course we've got planks in it. The planks drop down from the back down there like that, round the front like that. We've got the thwart going around here. There's the front bit. Depending on the angle at the boat's at, sometimes you can see inside it, sometimes you won't. If you can, that's what you'll see inside it. And of course the back end then, you might have a rudder or whatever, but sitting in water you don't very often see much of the rudder because it's usually well under the water. So there we are. There we have a very simple boat. From the front, it's the same figure of 8 loop, but the front goes in instead of the stern. Take that down there. This little turn gives you the sweep of the boat, makes the boat look normal, makes it look as if it's been built and designed. Sitting in water like so, you see the planks coming around the back like that. Planks from the front, particularly on old clinker-built boats, sort of dropping down like that. Occasionally you'll have an extra little piece on the front like that, you'll see inside to the back, and that becomes a boat from the front. If the boat's at an angle, it's sitting on shingle, then you simply put your figure of 8 in at a different angle, so you get that. And of course you'll see a lot more of the actual bottom of the boat because it's not actually in the water, so we'll see that like that. I'll go around there, you'll see the front in here, a bit like that. Front will come down, it'll sit on the pebbles, maybe see underneath here there's the propeller and the rudder. Of course you'll see the rudder on a shot like this because it's the whole boat is virtually out of the water. Because very often you'll see boats like this. Boats aren't always in the water, especially on the coast. Depending on the tide, you'll see boats at all times drawn up out of the water either for maintenance or just literally being brought out of the sea at fishing boats on coastlines. So it's always handy to know how to put a boat in like that at an angle. A couple of oars coming out of it like so, and maybe a bit of a thing here where the engine is or the motor unit, or perhaps just the drive for fetching up the actual lobster pots or whatever else. You see all the little bits of paraphernalia on here. The boat's slightly on the lean, so all this is slightly on the lean. A bit like that. And there we have it, a boat on the lean, sitting on shingle. Ships at sea, especially older types of ships, have got the same shape. See the front. Particularly things like old trawlers, things like that. They've all got that shape, the old sweep, like the old Grand Banks trawlers, and like the old Mincarlo and Lydia Eva and things like that. Ships that went out into rough North Seas, you see that all that sort of shape on them. Bits in the water like so. There's the old sea coming down the side of them. And of course the superstructure on the top, you know, is built up on top of your loop. Even the little boat hanging on the davits at the back you can do by having a very, very simple figure of 8 loop. And if the boat's slightly on the angle, of course the masts and everything else will also be slightly on the angle, because if the boat's sitting at a slight tilt, then obviously anything that's coming off the boat up into the air, like the masts and so on, will also be at a slight tilt. They've got to be. They can't be going up absolutely vertically. And the same goes for the stanchions and so on the front, all that kind of thing will all lean with the boat. And there we have it, the shape of a classic steam trawler. But it's basically created out of that figure of 8. Because I drew this in water-soluble pen, I can now create some shapes and some forms with it. Later on I can look at it and say, I could turn this into a coloured study. I can start to wash this in and put the shadows in it and all the rest of it and make it look quite dramatic. It's a good way of working out what you're going to do with a painting like that. It helps you understand the shapes, the forms, the way that you can make the light play on it, how you can make an interesting painting out of. We've got right here, which is basically the beginnings, the starts of a huge seagoing vessel. There we go, a fishing vessel based on a figure of 8. Occasionally you want to paint a boat in a really dramatic situation, I mean basically, unless you were in real danger at sea, you wouldn't see it like that, so use your imagination. This is a lifeboat, I mean it's still going to be based on a figure of 8 loop, but to get it dramatic, all I'm going to do here is make the front part of the 8 much larger and broader than the back part. And that tip it on the angle, and that gives me the starting point then for a really dramatic painting. So I'm going to put a bow in here like this. This is a boat sort of crashing through waves. So that's how the drawing's created. Have a look at this now. This is a painting depicting the same thing. It isn't actually watercolour, it's actually painted in gouache to get the opaqueness of it, the heavy dark sea and the white spray. Here's the tug, the flying buzzard. One of the things that you'll find very useful to learn to paint when painting old boats is painting rust. So let me show you how you paint the rust on an old tug like this. First of all, burnt sienna, burnt umbers, putting in any old pattern at all you like. A bit like that, a little bit in there, a little bit here, a bit there. A little bit like this. Then burnt umber, again with some different sort of brush strokes and patterns, and almost like a jigsaw of burnt siennas and burnt umbers. When that's thoroughly dry, simply by coming across here with a pale grey and then later a darker grey and leaving odd bits of the burnt siennas unpainted, we can make this look perfectly like rust. And then finally onto the top of that, you want the darker greys, which is basically going to be a bit of burnt umber, a bit of ultramarine. And we just pick out the odd little bit here and just put a bit of dark on it, and perhaps a little bit of black paint still on that bit there. A bit more underneath this trim. Being a tug, of course, got the rope sort of timber thing all around the side, so it can, well, like a bumper of a sort, isn't it? And there we have it. A rusty hull. Another method of creating boats, or the effect of boats, is I've got a little piece prepared. It's got to be on wood pulp paper for it to work. It won't work on cotton paper. We're taking little stencils and a sponge and literally just placing the stencil on the painting and wipe it out. These stencils are actually cut out of a piece of thin plastic with a scalpel. You can cut the stencils to be anything you like, and by carefully placing them across here, imagine trying to paint a sailing regatta, for example. You'd be here all day painting mountains and backgrounds around sails, but just by this method you can put all your background in first. And this would work also with things like beach scenes and things like that when you've got boats and backgrounds, hotels and things like this. And by using some smaller sails in the distance, you'd even create the idea of a lot of depth and distance using this technique. So, and a few more. These are then sails on the other side of the lake. But remember, it'll only work with a wood pulp paper, this, but it's a beautiful effect. What you can also do when you've done this afterwards is you come back when this is all dried and you actually apply colour back over where you've lifted these sails out. There we are. We've now got a lake with boats.